In 1928, a pair of newlyweds decided to spend their honeymoon rafting the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. No life jackets, no real plan. Just them, a wooden boat, and 270 miles of white water. A month later, their boat was discovered, perfectly upright, supplies still neatly packed inside. Bessie's diary was still there, but Glenn and Bessie were gone. Nearly 100 years later, nobody can tell you what happened to them, and that, you guys, is just one of 10 national park disappearances that still have no explanation. Let's get into it. Okay, hear me out. We are starting off with one that's a little different, but it's tied to our national parks, and it is genuinely one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the last century. December 5th, 1945, 5 Navy Avenger torpedo bombers took off from Fort Lauderdale on a routine 2-hour training flight. 14 crew members total. About an hour in, the flight leader radioed back. They were lost. Compasses weren't working. They couldn't tell which direction was land. Communications got more and more frantic, and then silence. A rescue plane with 13 men aboard was dispatched immediately. It also vanished. Now, the vanishing point is famously tied to the Bermuda Triangle, but one theory, one that's been investigated by park archaeologists, is that the planes were wildly off course and crashed deep in the Everglades. The Everglades are 1.5 million acres of mostly water, alligators, bull sharks, dense mangroves. To this day, no definitive wreckage has ever been found. 27 men, 5 planes, 1 search plane, 0 answers. The official Navy report said they vanished as completely as if they had flown to Mars, which it's not really very comforting. This one is recent enough that it kind of makes me feel a little nervous. June 2021, Charles Lyon, 49 years old, from Tyler, Texas. He drove himself to the Grand Canyon, stayed at a Best Western, and then abandoned his vehicle near the South Rim, walked away from his car into one of the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth, and was never seen again. Searches went on for weeks. They then transitioned into a limited recovery mode, but nothing. Now, Charles' case doesn't have the century-old lore of some of the others on this list, but it's the fact that this happened just a few years ago. A man parks his car, walks into the canyon, and vanishes. That definitely gets a little under my skin. Larry Kimball, 39 years old, April 2003. Larry leaves his home in Michigan, tells his family he's heading to Glacier National Park in Montana, and he does. His 1998 GMC pickup was found abandoned in the park, and that's it. That's all we have. No sign of Larry, no gear found, no remains, no witnesses who saw him on a trail, just a truck sitting in Glacier National Park waiting for an owner who never came back. Now, this is another thing that makes this case even more haunting. Glacier is massive. Over 1 million acres. Some of the most rugged backcountry in the continental United States. Grizzly country. If something happened to Larry out there, well, 20 plus years later, the park has kept its secrets. His family still doesn't have answers, and what do you do when all you have is a truck and a question mark? This one isn't a disappearance in the traditional sense, but it's been an open NPS cold case for over 40 years, and it is genuinely disturbing. A family is exploring Summit Meadow off Glacier Point Road in Yosemite, a beautiful subalpine area, wildflowers, the whole thing. One of the family members discovers a severed hand and forearm in the meadow. Already terrible. Investigators searched the area exhaustively, found no other body parts, and for decades they couldn't even identify the victim. Then in 2022, nearly 40 years later, DNA testing finally gave her a name: Patricia Hicks, a woman linked to a local cult leader who allegedly used illicit substances to disorient and then harm women. The cult leader disappeared before he could be prosecuted. And then notorious serial killer Henry Lee Lucas confessed to the crime, revealing crime scene details that had never been made public. But here's the thing, his confession was deemed circumstantial, and he died in prison in 2001. So the case remains officially unsolved. Who killed Patricia Hicks? Why was only her hand found? And what happened to the rest of her? Chris Fowler was 34 years old in 2016. He was a thru hiker, one of those people attempting to walk the entire 2,650 miles of the Pacific Crest Trail from Mexico to Canada. By October, he had made it to Washington Washington state. He was so close to finishing, he got dropped off near White Pass on October 12th. His last cell phone ping came from a remote stretch of trail, and then nothing. Massive searches followed. Volunteers from the PCT community, search and rescue teams, the whole works, but they never found him. Not his body, not his gear, not a single trace. His family runs a foundation now to help other families of missing hikers, but here is one thing that really stays with me. Chris was 34. He was on a trail that thousands of people hike every year. He was in his element, and he still vanished. This isn't some 1920s mystery with no records. This is 2016. We have satellites, we have cell towers, and a man walking a well-traveled trail just disappeared. Michael Fisiri, 51 years old, an experienced backpacker. This is June 2005. He set out alone to hike near the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir in Yosemite, which, if you haven't seen it, it is this stunning, lesser visited corner of the park. Think granite peaks, deep valleys, just absolutely gorgeous, as it seems like all of Yosemite is. He planned to hike through the Tiltil Valley area. Michael never came out. Michael was not a novice. He was an experienced hiker and backpacker who knew what he was doing. The National Park Service lists his case as one of their active cold cases. The Charlie Project still has his file open. The prevailing theory is that he became lost or injured somewhere in that backcountry, but after 20 years, there's no body, no gear, no answers. Hetch Hetchy is rugged, don't get me wrong, but it's not the surface of the moon. Searches were comprehensive, and yet a 51-year-old man who knew those trails simply never came home. Have you ever heard of a hunt for antlers that turned into a decades-old mystery? Yellowstone National Park is a place where millions venture each year, yet among its sprawling wilderness lies a baffling case from 1991. Dan Campbell, a 42-year-old Montana man, disappeared while illegally hunting elk antler sheds, a practice that many locals call shed hunting. Campbell set off from Hell-Roaring Trailhead on a 4-day expedition with his dog, aiming to collect antlers for a lucrative market. When he failed to return, his disappearance ignited an extensive search. Despite theories suggesting he might have fallen, might have been attacked, or even taken by rival hunters in the underground antler trade, no trace of Campbell or his dog was ever found. His mysterious vanishing remains a stark example of how even an activity as seemingly harmless as antler hunting can end in tragedy. What would you do if an experienced hiker vanished without a trace, leaving nothing behind but his bag? In June 2005, 51-year-old Michael Fisiri set out for a solo hike in Yosemite National Park's lesser-traveled Hetch Hetchy area. Known for his deep love of the outdoors and his meticulous planning, Michael was not one to take unnecessary risks. Yet, on that fateful day, he disappeared. Later, his bag was discovered abandoned. It still held his map, water, and camera, yet there was no sign of him. Despite massive search efforts and the involvement of seasoned rescue teams, no further clues surfaced. Michael's disappearance has left his family and the park's community with more questions than answers, turning his case into one of Yosemite's most perplexing mysteries. Imagine hiking your favorite trail and then never coming back. Could a lapse in memory or age be the culprit? In January 2024, 73-year-old Thomas Irwin from Indianapolis set out to hike the Petroglyph Point Trail in Mesa Verde National Park. Known to struggle with his cognitive impairment and reliant on his medication, Thomas's journey took a tragic turn when he failed to return. His family reported him missing the very next day, and after a grueling 10-day search, hope began to fade. Then, in February 2025, human remains were discovered by search teams using a specialized detection canine. Although the discovery brought a measure of closure to his loved ones, the circumstances of Thomas Irwin's disappearance serve as a sobering reminder that even seasoned hikers are vulnerable, and that age and health can sometimes conspire with the wilderness to keep someone lost forever. What if a peaceful solo hike turned into a tragedy in one of the world's most stunning canyons? Grand Canyon National Park isn't just famous for its jaw-dropping vistas, it's also the scene of unsolved tragedies. days. In 2024, a 60-year-old hiker from North Carolina embarked on a challenging, multi-day solo trek along the Thunder River Trail. When his family realized he hadn't checked in, a search was launched. A helicopter soon located his body near the trail, but the cause of his death remains under investigation. Was it a misstep on treacherous terrain, an unexpected medical emergency, or something even more sinister? This case, which marks one of the 14 deaths recorded in the park that year, reminds us that even the most experienced adventurers can fall victim to the relentless forces of nature. How can someone vanish in one of America's most famous parks, leaving behind not a single trace? On September 30th, 2002, Walter H. Reynard, a 66-year-old hiker, disappeared in Yosemite National Park, and he was never found. Despite numerous search efforts in the vast wilderness of Yosemite, no evidence or remains have surfaced to explain his disappearance. Reinhardt's case stands out not only for its longevity, but also for the eerie silence that followed his vanishing act. His story fuels theories ranging from a fatal misadventure amid the park's perilous cliffs to possible foul play. Yet every year that passes deepens the mystery, leaving families and investigators haunted by one of Yosemite's most enduring unsolved cases. What do you do when a simple day hike turns into a lifelong mystery? In June 2011, 30-year-old George Penka set out on what should have been a routine day hike in Yosemite National Park. Known for his friendly demeanor and habit of carrying a distinctive blue cloth bag, George was with a group when he became separated on a popular trail. Despite efforts by his hiking companions and subsequent search operations, George was never seen again. His disappearance remains an unsolved puzzle, a reminder that even in one of the most visited parks in the nation, someone can simply vanish without a trace, leaving behind only memories and unanswered questions.
Our first entry takes us to the desolate wilderness of the San Bois Mountains in Oklahoma, a remote corner often frequented by hunters and hikers. On October 8, 2009, Bobby, Sherilyn, and their 6-year-old daughter Madison vanished without a trace, seemingly swallowed whole by the Oweechee National Forest. They were scouting a property for sale, a seemingly innocuous trip that turned into a waking nightmare. Their truck was found abandoned days later, locked with their dog starving inside, their wallets, phones, and even Madison's purse was still in the vehicle. A chilling discovery inside the truck was a satanic Bible and a note hinting at a dispute. For 4 long years, the forest held its breath, offering no answers. Then in November 2013, 3 skeletons were found by hunters, just 3 miles from where the truck was abandoned. The remains were later identified as the Jamison family. The cause of death? Undetermined. No signs of trauma, no clear motive, just a haunting mystery forever etched into the landscape of the Oweechee. What happened to the Jamisons in those isolated woods? The silence of the forest offers no comfort. The Grand Canyon is a place of immense scale, but in 2011 a hiker found something that reduced that scale to a terrifyingly personal level. While trekking near the south rim, a visitor spotted a human hand resting on a rock ledge, completely detached from any body. This wasn't a historical artifact or a medical specimen, it was a fresh discovery. National Park Service investigators were absolutely baffled by this. Despite a massive search involving cadaver dogs and rappelling teams, no other remains were ever found. No torso, no skull, no identification. The hand was eventually linked through DNA to a man that had been reported missing months earlier, but how his hand ended up alone on a ledge miles from where he was last seen and with no signs of a struggle or a fall remains one of the canyon's most gruesome puzzles. Yosemite National Park, a symbol of American wilderness, usually evokes images of grandeur and awe, but in October 2016, a chilling discovery shattered that idyllic image. A human foot still encased in a hiking boot, found by a park visitor near a popular trail. The foot was found off-trail in a remote and kind of steep area, but investigators confirmed that it was human and believed to have been there for some time, possibly months or even years. Despite extensive searches, no other remains were ever located, and the identity of the individual remained a mystery. How did a single foot, still in its boot, end up in such an isolated location? Was it an accident, a tragic fall, or something far more sinister? The Badlands National Park in South Dakota is a land of dramatic, eroded buttes and pinnacles, a place of stark beauty and ancient history. But in 1999, it became the scene of a gruesome discovery that remains unsolved. A headless, handless, and footless body was found in a remote area of the park. The victim, a woman, was never identified. The dismemberment, clearly an attempt to hinder identification, pointed to a brutal and calculated crime. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement, including DNA analysis and forensic reconstruction, the woman's identity and the circumstances around her death remain shrouded in mystery. Sedona, Arizona, renowned for its spiritual energy and breathtaking red rock landscapes, is also a hotbed for cryptid enthusiasts. While not a national park, it borders national forest land, and within its ancient canyons, disturbing reports of Bigfoot sightings and unearthly sounds have persisted for decades. Hikers and campers have described encountering large bipedal creatures, often accompanied by strong foul odors. More unsettling are the auditory experiences, strange howls and guttural roars, and even what sounds like large objects being thrown or trees being broken. These aren't just isolated incidents. Reports are frequent and consistent, painting a picture of something powerful and elusive lurking in the shadowed canyons and dense pinyon juniper forests. Are these misidentifications, or is there a primal intelligence observing us from the wild edges of civilization?
Have you ever wondered how beauty can hide such a gruesome secret? In 1983, visitors to Yosemite's Summit Meadow made a macabre discovery: a severed hand and forearm lying among the wildflowers. For decades, investigators struggled with this baffling case until 2022, when DNA testing finally identified the remains as belonging to Patricia Hicks. Patricia's death is shrouded in controversy. While some suspect her link to a local cult leader played a role, others point fingers at notorious serial killer Henry Lee Lucas, who claimed responsibility for hundreds of crimes. Despite the grim details, no conclusive evidence has ever solved this crime. The eerie setting of Yosemite, with its majestic granite cliffs and hidden meadows, serves as a stark backdrop for a mystery that still sends shivers down the spine. What if your honeymoon ended in a mystery that still haunts the Grand Canyon nearly a century later? In November 1928, newlyweds Glenn and Bessie Hyde embarked on an adventurous honeymoon down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. Glenn, an experienced rafter, built a 20-foot wooden boat in hopes of setting a new speed record, while Bessie aimed to make history as the first woman to run the canyon. Yet on November 18th, the couple vanished. Their boat was later found intact with all of their supplies inside, including Bessie's diary, which only deepened the mystery. Over the years, theories have ranged from an accidental washout during heavy rapids to a sinister plot. One woman even claimed to be Bessie and confessed to killing Glenn before disappearing herself. Despite these rumors, the truth remains buried in the rapids of the Grand Canyon. Could someone you trust be the key to a chilling national park mystery? In 1996, Sheila Kearns, a 43-year-old employee at Mount Rainier's Paradise Inn, was set to begin a new chapter in her life. But after a bonfire party on October 4th, she simply vanished. Her belongings were found neatly arranged in her new employee housing, yet Sheila was nowhere to be seen. A 3-day search yielded no results until, after the winter thaw, skeletal remains were discovered scattered over a 300-yard area near the old Longmire campground. Despite an FBI probe, no suspect ever emerged, and the question of what truly happened to Sheila Kearns remains one of Mount Rainier's darkest mysteries. What happens when the person who knows every trail in the park just disappears? Imagine being the one who guides visitors through the rugged beauty of Chiricahua National Monument, and then, one day, you vanish. That's exactly what happened to park ranger Paul Braxton Fugate on January 13th, 1980. Paul left the visitor center to check a trail and was never seen again. Despite extensive searches across the monument's 17 square miles of canyons and wildlands, no clues emerged. His disappearance forced the National Park Service to offer a reward that eventually rose to $60,000, yet the case remains unsolved. For his family and colleagues, the mystery of Paul's fate is a haunting reminder that even those who know the land best can be swallowed by it. Paul Fugate was a law enforcement park ranger at Chiricahua National Monument in Arizona. January 1980. He left the visitor center to go on foot patrol, part of his regular duties. He knew this land, he worked on it every day, but he never came back. Now, this national monument is about 12,000 acres. That's around 19 square miles. Small by national park standards. Compare that to Yellowstone's 2.2 million acres, you'd think 19 square miles, a trained ranger who knows every trail. How do you not find him? They never did. No clothing, no equipment, no remains. For over 44 years, the case has been open and unsolved. And I just want to sit with that for a second. A park ranger, someone whose job was to know this land, to patrol it, to keep others safe, walked into 19 square miles of desert and rock formations and disappeared. If it can happen to the person whose job is to prevent it from happening, what does that say about the rest of us? I have to say, this one bothers me a lot because of how simple and how fast it happened. September 25th, 1981, Polly Melton, 58 years old, was hiking with two female friends on Deep Creek Trail in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Beautiful trail, well marked, nothing extreme. At some point, Polly walked ahead of her friends. She told them she'd wait for them at the next trail junction. Totally normal. You've done this, I've done this. Well, I haven't, but you walk ahead for a minute, you wait. Her friends came around the bend. Polly wasn't there. She never made it to the junction. She wasn't hiding, she wasn't lost, she knew where she was going. There was no sound of a struggle, no cry for help, nothing. 58 years old, in good health, on a trail she was familiar with people she knew just behind her. Search teams came, dogs, nothing. No trace of Polly Melton has ever been found. What happens in the 30 seconds between "I'll wait for you up ahead" and total disappearance? I actually just can't stop thinking about it. Morgan Heimer, 22 years old, June 2nd, 2015. Morgan was a river guide working for a commercial rafting company, Tour West, leading an 8-day trip down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. This was his job. He knew the river. The group had stopped for the night at camp around River Mile 213. That is pretty deep in the canyon, hours from any road or trailhead. Sometime that evening, Morgan walked away from camp. He didn't tell anyone where he was going, maybe to explore, maybe to find some solitude, but either way, it was the last time anyone saw him. Search and rescue arrived the next morning by helicopter. They combed the canyon walls, the riverbanks, the trails. Morgan was 6 feet tall, 175 pounds, blonde hair, blue eyes, not someone who blends into a crowd, and yet nothing. No body, no gear. The search was eventually scaled back, but the case remains open. Nearly a decade later, his family is still waiting. A professional river guide on a trip he'd done before at a campsite with other people. Just walked a few feet from the group and gone. And here we are at number 1, the most famous unsolved disappearance in American National Park history, and honestly one of the most haunting love stories I've ever heard. Glenn and Bessie Hyde. Newlyweds, 1928. They decided to spend their honeymoon rafting the entire length of the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon in a wooden boat that Glenn built himself. No life jackets, no real safety plan. Bessie wanted to be the first documented woman to complete the journey. They were last seen on November 18th by Emery Kolb, a famous Grand Canyon photographer and river runner. He actually took a photo of them, the last known image of Glenn and Bessie alive. Kolb noted that Bessie seemed hesitant about continuing. They didn't even have life jackets. A month later, on December 19th, their boat was found. It was upright, perfectly intact. All their supplies were still packed inside. Bessie's diary was there. Her last entry talked about the rapids ahead, but Glenn and Bessie themselves gone. No bodies were ever found, and over the decades since, the story has gotten even stranger. In 1971, a woman named Elizabeth Cutler came forward claiming to be Bessie Hyde. She said she stabbed Glenn during a fight and had been living a different life. Then she later recanted. Then, after legendary river runner Georgie Clark died in 1992, the Hyde's marriage license and birth certificate for Bessie DeRoss were found among her belongings. Was Georgie Clark actually Bessie hide? Some historians have discounted it, others aren't so sure, but nearly 100 years. The boat was fine, the diary was fine, the people were just not there. Honeymoon Rapid, the spot where they likely went in, is named after them now. A permanent tribute to a mystery that will probably never be solved. I don't know, maybe a honeymoon in the Grand Canyon wasn't the best idea anyone ever had. I don't know, I'll pass on that, I guess. Thanks. And there you have it, 10 disappearances in national parks that still have no explanation.
Number 5, Nahanni National Park Reserve. Now this is a strange case. Over the decades, many unfortunate travelers and explorers have gone missing, or they turned up dead and beheaded in the Nahanni Valley. Now the number of decapitated bodies found within the Nahanni Valley have earned it the nickname Valley of Headless Men. In 1917, Martin Jorgensen's body was discovered decapitated next to the remains of his cabin as it was burned to the ground. It is suspected that he struck gold in the vicinity as he wrote of it back home before ending up beheaded. Then in 1931, another body was found. This time it was that of Phil Powers. His charred remains were discovered in ashes of what were his cabin. The RCMP were quick to attribute his death to a faulty stovepipe, but their explanation was repeatedly debunked by various sources. Now many others simply disappeared without a trace in the remote wilderness of the valley. In 1928, one prospector named Angus Hall ventured ahead of his party and was never seen again. Another pair of prospectors, Joe Mulholland and Bill Ipper, disappeared in 1936. Now for many years they were searched for but were never found. The only thing discovered was their cabin, burnt down to the ground. Why are so many people going missing in this specific area, and why are their cabins being burnt down? Number 4, Mount Charleston in Humboldt-Toyabee National Forest. Larry Jeffrey disappeared near the peak of a 12,000-foot Mount Charleston in Humboldt-Toyabee National Forest. Now the search began immediately after the boy wandered away from his brothers, and within days the National Guard and a team of bloodhounds had joined the search. In a TV interview, David Paulies told reporter George Knapp that there were no predators afoot that day, and since the area they were in was pretty secluded, it's easy to rule out abduction by car. This boy just walked into oblivion, David said. Now when Jeffrey disappeared, he was wearing light clothing, and authorities were doubtful that he could survive the cold temperatures at night. Now searchers found and lost the trail a few times, and they discovered evidence that the boy had been eating insects and forged berries along the way. Overall, 1,000 people searched for 16 days but never found him. It appears that he just went poof, maybe into an alternate dimension. Perhaps. Number 3, Ozark National Park. In the 1940s, a girl named Catherine Van Alst went missing while camping at Ozark National Park with her family. She was barefoot and wearing only her swimsuit when she disappeared. Now searches were conducted high and low for the missing girl, but it wasn't until 6 days later that she was found. Now the catch, she was still barefoot, still in her swimsuit, and totally unharmed. She was alive. Now she'd also traveled over 30 miles and climbed 600 feet without getting a scratch on her. She wasn't even scared. Now no one, including her, has ever been able to explain it. Could she have gotten trapped in a portal and somehow made her way back to our world? That could be one explanation for sure. Number 2, Santa Fe National Forest. Santa Fe National Forest in New Mexico has bizarre wooden structures all throughout the forest. Now no one knows who made them or why. The structures range in size but have all been constructed out of fallen trees and limbs, with some reaching over 20 feet tall and dozens of feet in diameter. They don't seem to have a pattern as to their locations, they simply just appear. Now they do have a few things in common though. They resemble teepees, though no one can actually live inside them, and the Forest Service has no idea who is building them or why, but their response so far has been to dismantle any that are found. The destruction of these mystery structures is to eliminate the forest fire threat that they create. The Santa Fe National Park Service has issued a press release asking for any information about the mystery structures, and according to the release, these structures are prohibited under federal law and violators could face a fine up to $5,000 and possible imprisonment for 6 months. Now does this have to do with the cult? Can these structures transport you to another dimension? I guess we'll have to see. And coming in at number 1 is Green Mountain National Forest. The Vermont State Police exists because of Paula Jean Weldon. Now, Paula Weldon was a student at Vermont's Bennington College and was familiar with the Green Mountain National Forest to the east of her college town. Now, according to Bennington Banner, Paula set off for the trail on December 1st, 1946, telling her roommate, "I'm off for a long walk," and she was wearing relatively light clothing. Now, she apparently hitchhiked to the trail with local Louis Knapp, who gave a ride to a young woman matching her description. He dropped her off near the trail, and the last known person to see her was a washman named Ernie Whiteman, who warned her about going into the cold landscape. Once it became clear that Paula had gone into the forest but hadn't left, a search was organized, but it was to no avail. Now, Paula was actually one of 6 people who were reported missing near Bennington from 1945 to 1950. Now, their still unsolved disappearances helped to earn the nickname of Bennington Triangle for the area.
Yellowstone National Park, America's first national park, is a land of geothermal wonders. But within the historic walls of the Old Faithful Inn, it's not just the erupting hot springs that create a stir. Reports of paranormal activity have made it one of the most haunted locations in the national park system. Guests and staff have reported encounters with a spectral figure believed to be a former employee or even the hotel's original architect, Robert Reamer. Stories include unexplained footsteps in empty hallways, flickering lights, objects moving on their own, and the feeling of being watched. The most famous apparition is that of a woman in white, often seen gliding through the crow's nest area, which is an inaccessible part of the inn's attic. Is it the residual energy of lives lived and lost, or is it something more? While technically a national recreation area managed by the NPS, the Santa Monica Mountains hold a discovery that looks like a scene from a horror film. In 2016, hikers stumbled upon a meticulously constructed shrine hidden deep in the brush, complete with animal skulls, charred remains, and symbols associated with the occult. This wasn't just some teenagers playing a prank. The altar featured various animal carcasses that appeared to have been ritually sacrificed. Park rangers expressed concern not just over the illegal activity, but the potential for fire and the disturbing nature of the site. It served as a visceral reminder that for some, the deep woods aren't a place for hiking, but a sanctuary for practices that the modern world has long since tried to forget. The Great Basin National Park in Nevada is a place of ancient bristlecone pines and vast starry skies, but its history holds a dark secret, a period when indigenous people were disturbingly displayed, essentially creating a human zoo. In the early 20th century, particularly between 1900 and 1930, practices considered abhorrent today were not uncommon. Paiute and other Native American individuals were sometimes coerced or even abducted and placed in ethnological exhibits or living museums within the national park or nearby areas, including those in the Great Basin region. These displays were presented as educational, but in reality, they dehumanized indigenous people, reducing them to curiosities for the entertainment of white audiences. Yosemite National Park, despite its postcard beauty, has not been immune to brutal acts of violence. In 1984, the park was shaken by a heinous crime, the acts of 2 women in the remote wilderness. On March 21st, 1984, friends Carol Sun and Joy Armstrong, both 16, were camping in a secluded area of the park when they were brutally attacked with an axe. The discovery of their bodies sent shockwaves through the usually tranquil park community. The investigation was extensive, leading to the eventual arrest and conviction of a transient drifter named Carrie Dean Moore. Our final disturbing entry takes us to the remote and rugged Big Bend National Park in Texas, a vast expanse of desert, mountains, and the Rio Grande. For over a century, this isolated region has been home to the mysterious Marfa Lights, but within the park itself, unexplained phenomena has also been reported. Beyond the famous Marfa Lights, which are typically seen outside of the park, visitors deep within Big Bend have described encountering strange, unexplained lights and aerial phenomena. These aren't just distant glows. Some reports detail lights that move erratically, change color, or even appear to interact with the landscape, defying conventional explanation. In such a vast and sparsely populated area, the darkness amplifies every anomaly. Are these atmospheric conditions, secret government tests, or something far more unusual? The silent, ancient landscape of Big Bend holds its secrets close, occasionally offering a glimpse of the truly inexplicable.
In 1996, a family of 4 from Germany, Eckhard Rimkus, his young son George, girlfriend Cornelia Mayer, and her son Max set out on a vacation that would take them through Southern California, Las Vegas, and eventually Death Valley National Park. On July 23rd, they vanished without a trace. Their green Plymouth Voyager was eventually found months later in a remote part of the park, way off any normal tourist route. The tires were flat, and it had clearly been driven over extremely rough terrain. Inside were toys, supplies like a tent, a brand new sleeping bag. There was also a beer bottle under a bush about a mile from the van, next to what looked like a shady resting spot. The mystery wasn't solved until 2009, when two off-duty search and rescue guys, Les Walker and Tom Mahood, found skeletons of two adults along with personal belongings like a passport and journal. The remains of the children were never found. Most believe the family tried a shortcut through rough terrain to reach Yosemite, got stranded, and then tried to hike out for help. Did a woman named Patricia Hicks die at the hands of a serial killer, a cult leader, or something else entirely? Back in 1983, a family hiking through Summit Meadow in Yosemite came across something no one ever wants to find: a human hand and part of a forearm. Rangers searched the area, but they came up empty. 5 years later, though, a skull missing the jawbone turned up nearby. But they still had no idea who this person was or what had happened. For decades, she was known only as the Summit Meadow Jane Doe. But just recently, DNA testing finally put a name to the remains: Patricia Hicks. She'd grown up in Washington, had a bit of a rough past that eventually ended up in California, where she got involved with a cult-like group led by a guy named Donald Eugene Gibson. He was later convicted of some very serious crimes, then skipped town before he could be sentenced. He was never found. Right around that time, Patricia caught a bus to Yosemite and was never seen again. Investigators believe she might have been trying to start over or escape something, but what happened to her out there? Well, it's still a mystery. Yosemite National Park was the setting for one of the creepiest true crime cases in the late 90s. A guy named Cary Stayner worked at a motel right outside the park. He seemed quiet, kept to himself, had no criminal record at the time, but in 1999, 3 women, Carol Sund, her daughter Julie, and their friend Silvina Peloso, went missing while visiting Yosemite. At first, there wasn't much to go on, but then their rental car was found burned, with 2 bodies inside. Turns out Cary Stayner had lured them in and killed them, after subjecting them to things I can't discuss here on YouTube. And a few months later, he killed a park naturalist named Joy Armstrong, and that's when the FBI finally caught up with him. He's also suspected of taking the lives of 4 other people, but his confirmed deaths were enough to land him a death sentence in 2002. He's still waiting on death row, though. Odd thing about this case is Cary's backstory, too. His younger brother, Steven Stayner, had been kidnapped as a kid and escaped years later. His story even got turned into a TV movie. So yeah, this family had already been through a lot before Cary's crimes came to light. The Grand Canyon is, of course, massive, beautiful, full of tourists and hikers, but it's also kind of a magnet for people disappearing or turning up dead. Park rangers come across bodies way more often than you'd think. One of the most unsettling finds happened back in 2014 when they discovered human remains wedged into a remote part of the canyon. There was no ID, no obvious sign of trauma, just bones. And over the years, multiple sets of remains have been found scattered around the park, usually hikers who find them completely by accident. Some of these people had been missing for years and no one had a clue where they went. The crazy part is that even with modern forensics, some of these folks still haven't been identified. Some fell, some may have gotten lost and died from exposure, and others, well, no one really knows. One guy's body was found 11 years after he disappeared, just lying in a ravine. So, really makes you realize how massive and unforgiving this place can be. From Reddit user Anna Salmon comes the story of the ghost on the water. She writes, I had a paranormal encounter when I was camping with a few friends in Okanagan Falls, British Columbia, Canada. We were camping to celebrate my 13th birthday, and the girls and I had walked down to the lake for a swim. On the walk back to our campground, we walked along a river that had a fair-sized dam. Unfortunately, there had been an accident where 2 brothers drowned after being unable to escape the turbines a few years earlier. The dam had been marked with a skull and crossbones, and large signs saying danger. We were a couple hundred meters down the river and close to our campground when I saw an incredibly clear and bright white figure of a portly preteen boy walking atop the water. I stopped, I told my friends to look, and one of them did and exclaimed she saw him too. The other covered her face and said she was too scared to look. We watched him for a few minutes until he just faded away. He walked along the river's surface slowly for about 10 meters, and then disappeared. It is still the most incredible supernatural encounter I've ever had. Sheila Kearns had just landed a job working at the iconic Paradise Inn in Mount Rainier National Park. She was 43 and by all accounts, doing a great job. In fact, she was doing so well, they asked her to stick around for the winter, which is a big deal considering how harsh those winters can get. The last time anyone saw her was October 4th, 1996, at a staff bonfire that marked the end of the summer season. She was excited about staying on. A few days later, though, she was gone. On October 6th, she didn't show up for work. People checked her room and found all her stuff, but no Sheila. The park launched a search, thinking maybe she got lost hiking a trail. Not a piece of clothing, not even a footprint though. Then the snow came in and shut everything down. It was May of 1997 that a volunteer setting up a training course found skeletal remains scattered near a campground, about a mile from where Sheila worked, and it was her. To this day, her death is still a mystery. A now deleted Reddit user wrote about a horrifying experience they had when they were young. It goes as follows. When I was 8 or 9, my mom took me to a reservoir that I think was near a national park. She made baskets and things from natural materials and I went along to help collect. I wandered off a little and I was picking up trash and things in a bag and a basket. I saw what I thought was a discarded glove on the lakeshore and went to pick it up so I could put it in my bag, and well, it wasn't a glove. It was someone's left hand from about a few inches from the wrist into the arm. The person had been in the water for a few days, and I picked up their severed hand. I started screaming, and I guess my hands were clenched onto the dead hand. My mom came running and had to pry my hands open just to drop it. We went to the closest gas station to call the cops. This was the early to mid-90s, pre-cell phones. From what I learned later, there had been a group of inebriated teenagers with a powerboat, and one had fallen in or something and gotten hit by the boat. I found that chunk of him. They tried to convince me at the time that it was a bear paw. I didn't talk for about 2 months, and I still have problems with recently dead things. By the way, I think we should all have problems with recently dead things. I don't think that should ever become, mundane, but anyway, I know what she means.
Number 5. Polly Melton. Polly Melton was not someone you would expect to be an avid hiker. Although out of shape and a heavy smoker, she still loved the mountains, hiked regularly, and made the base of Smoky Mountains in North Carolina her summertime home. She was well known in the mountain town community, even volunteering almost daily at senior homes in town. Now one day Polly went on a trail marked Easy in September of 1981. According to the 2 women she was hiking with, she sped up ahead them. It wasn't a far distance, but she went over a knoll out of sight. When the 2 women she had been walking with only moments prior got over the hill, Polly had completely vanished. They heard no strange noises indicating distress and saw no sign of a struggle. They continued to the campsite and still no Polly. Now Polly didn't have any belongings with her, not even a change of clothes or her purse. Now she was also on medications for high blood pressure and nausea, and she didn't have these with her either. There was no trace of her until a little over a year later when a check in her name was cashed in Alabama. Now police failed to say without a doubt that it was her signature, and there's a popular theory that she decided to run off that day. Did she secretly meet with someone in the woods? I guess we'll never know. Number 4. Nahanni Valley deaths. Over the decades, many unfortunate travelers and explorers have gone missing, or they turned up dead and beheaded in this valley. The number of decapitated bodies found within Nahanni Valley have earned it the nickname Valley of the Headless Men. In 1917, Martin Jorgensen's body was discovered decapitated next to the remains of his cabin as it was burned to the ground. It's supposed that he struck gold in the vicinity as he wrote of it back home before ending up beheaded. Then in 1931, another body was found. This time it was of Phil Powers. His charred remains were discovered in the ashes of what was his cabin. The RCMP was quick to attribute his death to a faulty stovepipe, but their explanation was repeatedly debunked by various sources. Many others simply disappeared without a trace in the remote wilderness of the valley, and in 1928, one prospector named Angus Angus Hall ventured ahead of his party and was never seen again. Another pair of men, Joe Mulholland and Bill Eppier, disappeared in 1936. For many years they were searched for but never found. The only thing discovered was their cabin, burned down to the ground. So why do so many people go missing in this specific area, and why are their cabins being burnt down? I need answers. Number 3. Larry Jeffrey. Larry Jeffrey disappeared near the peak of 12,000 foot Mount Charleston in Humboldt-Toibi National Forest. The search began immediately after the boy wandered away from his brothers, and within days the National Guard and a team of bloodhounds had joined the search. In a TV interview, David Paldies told reporter George Knapp that there were no predators afoot that day, and since the area they were in was pretty secluded, it's easy to rule out an abduction by car. This boy just walked into oblivion, David said. Now, when Jeffrey disappeared, he was wearing light clothing, and authorities were doubtful that he could survive the cold temperatures at night. Searchers found and lost the trail a few times, and they discovered evidence that the boy had been eating insects and foraged berries along the way. Overall, around 1,000 people searched for 16 days, but they never found him. Number 2. Douglas Legg. Douglas Legg and some of his family were heading out for a hike at the Adirondack Forest Preserve, Sanatoni Preserve, when his uncle spotted poison ivy and told him to put on long pants to protect himself. Now, the family's cabin was a short, straight shot from where they were, but Douglas was never seen again. Now, he was very familiar with these woods as his family owned the cabin where they were staying and described him as a mini woodsman. Douglas's disappearance sparked one of the southern Adirondack's largest search and rescue missions, with more than 600 people searching the woods, but he left no trail. Rescuers used dogs in their search, and the dogs followed his scent over a 30-mile trail through difficult terrain. Now, there's no way he could have traveled alone for such a distance. Some researchers reported seeing bear-like tracks near the site, and while black bears do drag their prey to cover, dragging someone 30 miles over difficult terrain seems unusual. The family became desperate and began suspecting each other and even their friends of abducting Douglas, but the police were certain he had simply gotten lost. Now, he was never seen again, and he still has not been found. And coming in at number 1 is David Gonzalez. David Gonzalez went camping with his family in San Bernardino National Forest. At one point, he asked his mother if he could go get some cookies from the family car. 40 minutes passed, and his mother realized that David never returned and that the cookies he wanted to grab were still inside the car. Then he was never found alive again. His death is viewed as one of the strangest disappearances in national parks. A week later, his badly decomposed body was found only a mile away from where he went missing. This area was already combed days prior, so this means that he must have been dropped there by someone or something. An autopsy revealed no trauma and no overt injury. He was just dead without any reason or clue as to why. Now, this is already baffling, especially considering the power of forensics and the skill of investigators, but what makes the case of David so strange is not his disappearance alone, it's the way the local authorities and investigators seem to have handled the case. The officials claim that David was dragged off by a mountain lion, despite no injuries that would suggest that to be his fate. No one nearby heard David scream either, and David's parents have gone on record to say that they don't believe David got dragged off by a cougar. They believe that he was kidnapped and that he still may be alive somewhere, and that body wasn't his. Now, this is sounding exactly like Stranger Things, and it's creepy. The family still thinks that he's out there, but law enforcement thinks this case is closed. Number 10. Wooden structures. Santa Fe National Forest in New Mexico has bizarre wooden structures all throughout the forest. No one knows who made them or why. The structures range in size, but have all been constructed out of fallen trees and limbs, with some reaching over 20 feet tall and dozens of diameter. They don't seem to have a pattern as to their locations, they simply appear. They do have a few things in common though. They resemble teepees, though no one can actually live inside them. Forage rangers will find anyone they catch making them, as they pose a fire risk, but they've never actually caught anyone. The Forest Service has no idea who's building them or why, but their response so far has been to dismantle any that are found. The destruction of these mystery structures is to eliminate the forest fire threat that they create. National Forest spokesperson Julie Ann Overton says whatever the structures are for, they are dangerous for the park and its visitors. They may have as many as 1,000 pieces of wood in them. The wood is seasoned and dry, and the design is similar to a classic kindling pyramid, but on a much larger scale. And to exacerbate the obvious fire danger, people appear to be using fire rings inside many of these structures. months. The Santa Fe National Park Service has issued a press release asking for any information about the mystery structures. According to the release, these structures are prohibited under federal law, and violators could face a fine up to $5,000 and possible imprisonment for up to 6 months. Now, does this have to do with a cult or Bigfoot? No one knows. Number 9. Bessie and Glenn Hyde. In 1928, Bessie and Glenn Hyde were honeymooning in northern Arizona at the Grand Canyon when they vanished. They were traveling down the Colorado River by boat in October and planned to boat through the Grand Canyon. Glenn had run tough rivers before, but Bessie was new at it. The couple ran across other boaters a few weeks before their disappearance who said they got the feeling that Bessie wanted to turn back, but Glenn was pushing her on. It was said if they completed the trip successfully, they would go on a paid lecture tour. So the trip was more than just fun, there was money at stake. Cut to several months later, the Hyde's boat was discovered that winter, seemingly undisturbed. It was upright and full of supplies, but the couple was gone. Now there are many theories about what happened to the Hydes. Did they disembark and try a too difficult side hike? Did they have an argument that turned violent, or were they abducted? There are conflicting reports on what happened to the Hydes, and there have been more than one Bessie Hyde sighting in the years that followed. Number 8. Devil's Den. This name just sounds creepy. Devil's Den is a state park situated in Arkansas, but it's part of the larger Ozark National Park that surrounds it. Unexplained disappearances have been happening here for years, and in the 1940s, a girl named Catherine Vast Oust went missing while camping at the park with her family. She was barefoot and wearing only her swimsuit when she disappeared. Searches were conducted high and low for the missing girl, but it wasn't until 6 days later that she was found. The catch, she was still barefoot, still in her swimsuit, and totally unharmed. She'd also traveled over 30 miles and climbed 600 feet without getting a scratch on her. She wasn't even scared. No one, including her, has ever been able to explain it. Number 7. UFO sightings. Yosemite National Park in California has been the site of UFO reports for years. Visitors see strange lights and disc-shaped orbs hovering in the sky. Usually they disappear quickly, but people have managed to capture photos and videos to back up their claims. In 2002, several people in different sections of the park saw a lighted disc fly across the sky. It disappeared within minutes, only to be followed by Air Force jets, who circled the area a while, then left. As far as anyone knows, nothing was found, but the pictures and videos remain proof that it was there, whatever it might be. Number 6. Missing park ranger. On January 13th, 1980, Ranger Paul Fugate disappeared from what should have been a routine hike in Arizona's Chiricahua National Monument. Paul, who was last seen heading out to do a trail check around 2 p.m., told a coworker that they could start closing duties without him if he wasn't back by 4:30 p.m. He was then seen starting down the trailhead, and that was the last any person spoke or saw him. His girlfriend alerted authorities, who undertook a search for him. They first assumed that he had been the victim of an accident and was injured or stranded in the backcountry. However, as the investigation continued and no trace was found, suspicions began to rise. One park volunteer came forward to say that he'd seen Paul in a truck with 2 strange men, leading some to wonder if he had been kidnapped. Or some proposed he may have simply ditched his old life. Whatever the truth, no trace of Paul has ever been found since that day in 1980. To make things even more difficult, Chiricahua has 17 square miles of canyons, treacherous terrain, and wildlands. The search and rescue teams found absolutely nothing related to the park ranger.
Back in April of 2023, 25-year-old Tremel Evans set out on a solo 5-night backpacking trip through Joshua Tree National Park. He had it all mapped out, starting from the Black Rock campground, hitting at Geology Tour Road, then looping back via the California Riding and Hiking Trail. He was supposed to get picked up on May 5th, but when he didn't show up, he was reported missing. Nothing turned up for over 8 months. Then in late January of 2024, park staff came across a backpack near one of the trails in the Black Rock area. That backpack turned out to be Tremel's, and not far from it, they found skeletal remains. The Riverside County coroner hasn't officially confirmed the identity or cause of death yet, but Tremel's family is convinced that it's him. Whether it was dehydration, a fall, or something else entirely, no one knows yet. While working on a remote trail project about 26 miles from the nearest trailhead, a Reddit user and their 2-person crew were cutting a new path through rugged terrain. Mid-morning, the Redditor stepped away from the group to use the bathroom, and suddenly heard someone whistling nearby. Assuming it was one of his crew, he shouted out, and the whistling stopped. It was quiet for a bit, but then it resumed and moved further downhill. That's when he saw two strange men walking below. The men were dressed in full black suits and were wearing top hats, casually strolling through the woods with canes. They didn't have any supplies, no water, they weren't even using a trail, they were just walking through the trees. Startled, the Redditor rushed back to the crew and described what he saw. The three of them returned to the spot just in time to catch a glimpse of the suited men disappearing between the trees. One of the crew members shouted real loud and waved, but the men completely ignored them and just kept walking. None of them really slept well that night. They finished the trail early the next morning and booked it back to civilization, still kinda creeped out. Alright, so this one's an old school ghost story that's stuck around for decades. The Headless Bride of Yellowstone's Old Faithful Inn. The story goes that back in the early 1900s, a young woman from a wealthy family eloped with a man her parents didn't really approve of. They ended up honeymooning at the inn, but supposedly the guy turned out to be violent. And one night, guests and staff heard screams coming from their room. When they checked it out, they found the bride was dead, and her head was gone. It was never found. The husband, of course, was nowhere to be seen. After that, people claimed to see her ghost wandering the halls in her wedding dress without a head. Some say she floats down the staircase late at night. Others have seen her in room 127, which is supposedly where all this happened. Rangers have passed the story down for years, and guests still talk about it. Whether this is real or just creepy folklore, the Old Faithful Inn has earned a pretty creepy reputation, and honestly, even just looking at the place on its own, it's really not that surprising. I mean, it's lovely, sure. Looking at it does have a certain ominous look about it too, though.
10. The Cowden family. 7.5 months after the Cowden family was reported missing in 1974, the police found their bodies. The Cowdens had gone camping in the Siskiyou Mountains in Applegate, Oregon over Labor Day weekend in 1974, but failed to show up for dinner at Richard Cohen's mother's house on September 1st. Media accounts from the time described their campsite as undisturbed, as if the family left abruptly. Investigators later postulated that they had been abducted. Then their bodies were found in April 1975, about 100 feet away from the campsite. Richard's body was found tied to a tree, while the other bodies of his wife, son, and daughter were found in a cave with rocks sealing the entrance. Dwayne Lee Little, a criminal serving 2 life sentences, allegedly confessed to a fellow inmate that he ended the lives of the Cowdens family while on parole, but there was no conviction and the case remains open. Number 9. Dennis Martin. Dennis Martin was on a camping trip near the Tennessee-North Carolina state line with his family in the summer of 1969. It was an annual Father's Day tradition. They headed to Smoky Mountain National Park to camp and hike. Dennis and his brothers had played a prank and they were going to hide separately in a bush and jump out on different sides of the campsite to scare the dads. They did this prank, but then they realized that Dennis was missing. Family, park rangers, and other hikers spread out the search for Dennis almost immediately, but he was nowhere to be found. That evening there was heavy rainfall, which is bad news when you're trying to track someone. The search for Dennis became the largest in National Park Service history, and one of the people searching was Park Ranger Dwight McCarter, who had successfully tracked down hundreds of missing persons. Dwight was a seasoned tracker, and he was struck by the complete lack of any sort of tracks. Dennis seemed to have disappeared completely, leaving no trace at all. Number 8. Bessie and Glenn Hyde. In 1928, Bessie and Glenn Hyde were honeymooning in northern Arizona at the Grand Canyon when they vanished. They were traveling down the Colorado River in a boat in October and planned to boat through the Grand Canyon. Glenn had run tough rivers before, but Bessie was new at it. The couple ran across other boaters a few weeks before their disappearance who said they got a feeling that Bessie wanted to turn back, but Glenn was pushing her on. It was said if they completed the trip successfully, they could go on a paid lecture tour. So this trip was more than just fun, there was money at stake. Cut to several months later, the Hyde's boat was discovered that winter, seemingly undisturbed. It was upright and full of supplies, but the couple was gone. Now there are many theories about what happened to the Hydes. Did they disembark and try too difficult difficult side hike? Did they have an argument that turned violent, or were they abducted? There are conflicting reports about what happened to the Hydes, and there has been more than one Bessie Hyde sighting in the years that followed. Number 7. Paul Fugate. On January 13, 1980, Ranger Paul Fugate disappeared from what should have been a routine hike in Arizona's Chiricahua National Monument. Paul, who had last been seen heading out to do a trail check around 2 p.m., told a coworker that they could start closing duties without him if he wasn't back by 4:30 p.m. He was then seen starting down the trailhead, and that was the last any person spoke to him or saw him. His girlfriend alerted authorities, who undertook a search for him, and they assumed that he had been a victim of an accident and was injured or stranded in the backcountry. However, as the investigation continued, no trace was found, and suspicions began to rise. One park volunteer came forward to say that he'd seen Paul in a truck with 2 strange men, leading some to wonder if he had been kidnapped. Or some proposed he may have simply ditched his old life. Whatever the truth, no trace of Paul has ever been found since that day in 1980. To make things more difficult, Chiricahua has 17 square miles of canyons, treacherous terrain, and wild lands. The search and rescue team found absolutely nothing related to the park ranger. Number 6. Catherine Van Elst. Devil's Den is a state park situated in Arkansas, but it's larger than the Ozark National Park that surrounds it. In the 1940s, a girl named Catherine Van Elst went missing while camping at the park with her family. She was barefoot and wearing only her swimsuit when she disappeared. Searches were conducted high and low for the missing girl, but it wasn't until 6 days later that she was found. Now the catch, she was still barefoot, still in her swimsuit, and totally unharmed. She'd also traveled over 30 miles and climbed 600 feet without getting a scratch on her, and she wasn't even scared. No one, including her, has ever been able to explain it. So what truly happened, it seems like we'll never know. Is a nightmare. Now at the moment there are 13 people still missing there, the disappearances ranging from 1972 to 2021. Now one disappearance is the case of Michael Fiercy. He was an outdoorsman, so why did he get lost and never be found? We don't know. In 2005, he decided to hike solo through Yosemite National Park. He had once cracked an ankle at Yellowstone, having to crawl all the way out of the wilderness, so when the outdoorsman failed to return from his adventure after his permit expired and his family expected him home, they feared the worst. Now the search for Fiercy was so massive that the United States Marines were involved. They found one thing belonged to him, his backpack. Now it contained his map, water, and camera. Now his friends and family were even more concerned at this point because they believed that Fiercy would never willingly leave his bag at any time during a hike. Now unfortunately, in the 16 years that have passed, not another trace of Fiercy has been found. With someone so experienced, I find this disappearance to be suspicious. Number 9. Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Dennis Martin was on a camping trip at Great Smoky Mountains National Park with his family in the summer of 1969. Dennis and his brothers had planned a prank. They were going to hide separately in the bush and jump out on different sides of the campsite to scare their fathers. They did the prank, but they realized that Dennis was missing. Family, park rangers, and other hikers spread out to search for Dennis almost immediately, but he was nowhere to be found. That evening there was heavy rainfall, which is bad news when you're trying to track someone. The search for Dennis became the largest in National Park Service history. Dennis seemed to have disappeared completely, leaving no trace at all. Now people's disappearances at national parks have prompted people to question how a map of missing persons in the US lines up with America's largest cave systems. Are these people disappearing and being taken to these caves by cave people, animals, or some sort of creature? And are the caves portals to parallel universes? Who knows? Number 8. San Bernardino National Forest. David Gonzalez went camping with his family in San Bernardino National Forest. At one point, he asked his mother if he could go get some cookies from the family car, but 40 minutes passed and his mother realized that David never returned, and the cookies he wanted to grab were still inside the car. Now, he was never found alive again. His death is viewed as one of the strange disappearances in national parks. A week after missing, his badly decomposed body was found only a mile away from where he went missing. Now this area was already combed days prior, so this means that he must have been dropped there by someone or something. An autopsy revealed no trauma and no overt injury. He was just dead without any reason or clue as to why. Now this is already baffling, but what makes the case of David so strange is not his disappearance alone, it's the way the local authorities and investigators seem to handle the case. The officials claim that David was dragged off by a mountain lion, despite no injuries that would suggest that be his fate. Nobody nearby heard David scream either. Now David's parents had gone on record to say that they don't believe David got dragged off by a cougar. They believe that he was kidnapped and that he still may be alive somewhere and that the body wasn't his. Now, is this sounding exactly like Stranger Things to anyone else? Maybe he got sucked into the Upside Down with Will and is fighting against a Demogorgon. Number 7. Grand Canyon National Park. At least 56 people have been reported missing from Grand Canyon National Park since the beginning of 2018, and at least 6 people have been found dead. Now this is despite the park not only being smaller, but seeing millions fewer visitors than many of the other 424 national park sites. While the park is beautiful, a New York Post investigation recently found it is also the deadliest national park in the country, with the most number of missing persons in the nation. On June 2nd, 2015, Morgenheimer was working for Tour West, a commercial rafting company, and he was a guide for an 8-day rafting trip along the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon. While standing near a cliff, Morgan spoke with the lead rafting guide and mentioned something about taking some time off that afternoon. The lead guide was pulled away by a client during this conversation and walked away from the cliff to speak with them. When the guide looked back to the direction that Morgan was standing, he was gone. Now the guide just assumed that Morgan had taken a break and would be back, but Morgan was never seen again. During the afternoon and into the evening, Morgan never showed up for the group's activities. A member of the group then reported Morgan missing that same day. Park rangers and search and rescue teams thoroughly searched the river and surrounding areas. The search lasted for 6 days before it was assumed that Morgan must have drowned. Now his body has never turned up, and there was no trace that he was still alive after June 2nd, 2015. Number 6. Chiricahua National Monument. On January 13th, 1980, Ranger Paul Fugate disappeared from what should have been a routine hike in Arizona's Chiricahua National Monument. Paul, who was last seen heading out to do a trail check around 2 p.m., told a coworker that they could start closing duties without him if he wasn't back by 4:30 p.m. He was then seen starting down the trailhead, and that was the last any person spoke to him or saw him. His girlfriend alerted authorities, who undertook a search for him. They first assumed that he had been a victim of an accident and was injured or stranded in the backcountry. However, as the investigation continued and no traces were found, suspicions began to arise. No trace of Paul has ever been found since that day in 1980. Now to make things even more difficult, Chiricahua has 17 square miles of canyons, treacherous terrain, and wildlands. Now the search and rescue teams found absolutely nothing related to the park ranger. Number 5. Bennington Triangle. Paula Weldon was a student at Vermont's Bennington College and was familiar with the Green Mountain National Forest to the east of her college town. According to the Bennington Banner, Paula set off for the trail on December 1st, 1946, telling her roommate, "I'm off for a long walk," and she was wearing relatively light clothing. She apparently hitchhiked to the trail with local Louis Knapp, who gave a ride to a young woman matching her description. He dropped her off near the trail, and the last known person to see her was a watchman named Ernie Whiteman, who warned her about going into the cold landscape. Once it became clear that Paula had gone into the forest but hadn't left, a search was organized, but it was to no avail. Paula was actually one of 6 people who were reported missing near Bennington from 1945 to 1950. Their still unsolved disappearances helped them earn the nickname of the Bennington Triangle for the area. Number 4. Mishandling of cases. David Gonzalez went camping with his family in San Bernardino National Forest. At one point, he asked his mother if he could go get some cookies from the family car. 40 minutes passed, and his mother realized that David never returned and that the cookies he wanted to grab were still inside the car. He was never found alive again. His death is viewed as one of the strangest disappearances in national parks. A week later, his badly decomposed body was found only a mile away from where he went missing. This area was already combed days prior, so this means that he must have been dropped there by someone or something. An autopsy revealed no trauma and no overt injury. He was just dead, without any reason or clue as to why. This is already baffling, especially considering the power of forensics and the skill of investigators, but what makes the case of David so strange is not his disappearance alone, it's the way the local authorities and investigators seem to handle the case. The officials claim that David was dragged off by a mountain lion, despite no injuries that would suggest that being his fate. No one nearby heard David scream either. David's parents have gone on record to say they don't believe David got dragged off by a cougar, they believe he was kidnapped, and that he still may be alive somewhere and that the body wasn't his. Some believe that authorities know more than what they're saying. Are they covering up something that we don't know about? What are they hiding from us? Number 3. The missing family. 7.5 months after the Coden family was reportedly missing in 1974, police found their bodies. The Codens had gone camping in the Siskiyou Mountains in Applegate, Oregon over Labor Day weekend in 1974, but failed to show up for dinner at Richard Cohen's mother's house on September 1st. Media accounts from the time described their campsite as undisturbed, as if the family left abruptly. Investigators had later assumed that they had been abducted. Their bodies were then discovered in April 1975, about 100 feet from the campsite. Richard's body was found tied to a tree, while the bodies of his wife, son, and daughter were found in a cave with rocks sealing the entrance. Dwayne Lee Little, a criminal serving 2 life sentences, allegedly confessed to a fellow inmate that he ended the life of the Codens while on parole. But there was no conviction, and the case remains open. Number 2. The Yucca Man. Few people can confidently tell you what exactly is the nature of being popularly known as the Yucca Man. Spotted around California's Joshua Tree National Park, Yucca Man has been variously interpreted as an unknown but real cryptid. Longreads notes that many reports of the Yucca Man began to arise in the 1970s when more and more people were settling the area with housing developments and exploring the park through hiking and camping. People report that the creature is often announced by its gut-wrenching body odor, while others have spotted its massive hulk amongst the brush or seen huge footprints in the soil. Many agree that it's covered in hair and often sports glowing red eyes. Even military personnel at nearby Edwards Air Force Base have encountered a very similar creature nicknamed Blue Eyes. Whatever the creature is, it sounds terrifying to me. And coming in at number 1 is cave systems. Dennis Martin was on a camping trip near the Tennessee-North Carolina state line with his family in the summer of 1969. It was an annual Father's Day tradition. They headed to Smoky Mountain National Park to camp and hike. Now Dennis and his brothers had planned a prank. They were going to hide separately in the bush and jump out on different sides of the campsite to scare them. They did the prank, but then they realized that Dennis was missing. Family, park rangers, and other hikers spread out to search for Dennis almost immediately, but he was nowhere to be found. That evening there was heavy rainfall, which is bad news when you're trying to track someone. The search for Dennis became the largest in National Park Service history. One of the people searching was Park Ranger Dwight McCarter, who had successfully tracked down hundreds of missing persons. Dwight was a seasoned tracker, and he was struck by the complete lack of any sort of tracks. Dennis seemed to have disappeared completely, leaving no trace at all. Now, people's disappearances at national parks have prompted people to question how a map of missing persons in the US lines up with America's largest cave systems. Are these people disappearing and being taken to these caves by cave people, animals, or some sort of creature? The mystery still remains, but I think caves are the best place to look for our answers.